We know who on the planning commission and city council. Obviously Jared's online, but do we know who else is online with the planning commission? Is there a way for someone?
Jared, Joy, and Andrea.
Okay. All right. Well then, if we're good to go, I guess we'll start the work meeting for Harriman City Council and Planning Commission joint work meeting for Thursday, April 29th, 2021. And we'll look for item 1.1, which is an approval of the December 16th, 2020 and February 4th, 2021 joint work meeting minutes. Okay. All right. Are we good with whatever change that Andrea requested in regards to her remarks?
So yeah, just approve as corrected.
Okay. Okay. Then we'll look for approval of the December 16th, 2020 and February 4th, 2021 joint work meeting minutes with the change that Andrea requested. Looking for a second.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, guys. And I'll ask any opposed just as we have some online. All right, guys. Then we'll look at item 1.2, which is a creation of a potential M2 zone. And then we'll look for city staff for additional information. Michael?
Thank you. And just for, I don't know if everyone is aware, but item 1.5, the property owner, the development interest in that property has requested that be removed from our agenda. We will not have a presentation on item 1.5. That will not be part of our discussion tonight. So, everything just got a little shorter, which I'm sure nobody will complain about. I am very excited for our conversations on these three items tonight and looking for feedback from council and commission. So again, feel free to jump in, ask questions, share your experience. When I had my first introduction to the city council and I was invited to speak or address the council, the first thing that I said, and I believe this sincerely, is that the residents of this city are the experts. My worldview says that you know things about your own community that as a consultant, as a professional, as a civil servant here in this community, I simply don't know. There are things about this community, community values, I'm still learning. And my job, our job as a planning department is to help you achieve what you believe and your neighbors, the residents of the city, want to achieve, your values that guide this. We'll share what we think are best practices. We'll introduce concepts that seem to be successful in other places, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what works here or even what we want. And not only do I respect that, but I welcome it. That's my worldview as a planner. So feel free to jump in and help us understand what it is you would like to achieve in these three areas tonight. So within the last 6 months, we've had a couple of issues come up in our existing M1 zoning district. We do have a TM, a technology manufacturing zone, that has been very limitedly applied, and it's a fairly new zoning district relatively. That's where Bullfrog Spa is located, and there's a couple of additional parcels there that are able to be developed within the TM zone. This project in the city is one of our few M1 zone properties that have been developed, and there's some additional properties here within the M1 zone that we'll look at in a map. But we've had this growing awareness that our M1 zone is allowing a number of uses that may not always be good neighbors. And as we've talked about this with the council, specifically with the council, there was a request that we look at creating an M2 zone with the idea that we would maybe have an M2 zone that would have a little slightly heavier manufacturing, or would simply allow for maybe more intense uses. And the M1 zone would be something a little bit lighter. We're probably all fairly aware that given the restrictions, the economic restrictions or appetite for commercial growth, that we're seeing a lot more interest in product like this. Typically, we see this as wholesalers. We see these units being for online retailers. Locally, we have DBAT is in one of these units, a very successful indoor recreation business. All sorts of clean or light manufacturing businesses are in this location. But typically it's manufacturing, wholesaling, services. We don't tend to see a lot of retail activity out of these spaces.
Michael, is this
Yes.
location the one with the 2 gymnastics, the 1 dance, and
Yes.
DBATs?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
This is Rockwell Landing
Yeah.
by Scenic Development. I believe is the right development partner there. So the concern or the interest in creating these 2 different zoning districts potentially, again, we have an M1 zone right now. We're talking about creating an M2 zone. And in your packet, we had an initial kind of land use table where we were breaking those 2 zoning types down. And if you have any feedback on that early draft, we welcome that tonight. The intent is to complete a draft of the manufacturing amendments and, of course, take that to the Planning Commission for a public hearing, recommendation to the City Council. But the interest, I think, from some of our development partners is to potentially look at our commercial zones, some of them, and rezone them with something more like an M1 that's a little bit cleaner, maybe a little bit more friendly to surrounding commercial or even potentially some residential development. So we're taking a commercial zone that is really oriented towards retail and services, medical and things like that, and replacing them with more like something that's like this, professional services, warehousing and things like that. One thing that's interesting to me is that our current commercial zones, not manufacturing zones, but our current commercial zones say that that businesses should not be doing wholesale activities like in our C2 zone. They should be retail. And of course, the city's interest there is tax generation and getting point of sale tax. So just be aware that that's kind of the next step. We create potentially these new zoning tools, but then we need to apply them. And I think as a city, we're going to see interest from our development partners of potentially putting M1 zone type uses in areas that we presently have zoned as commercial. So just be thinking about that. Now, in our current general plan, which of course influences or guides where we place our different zoning districts. And I apologize, it's a little bit washed out, but you'll see this purple area. This is where Jordan, the product we were just looking at is located. And then up here is the technology manufacturing zone. So feasibly, what we would probably consider doing is looking at breaking up the M1 zone that's here now and splitting it into M1 and M2, possibly. Of course, that's all private property, and I don't know if that would be the direction of the council and commission. But we got to be thinking about where would we apply these tools. Now, in the proposed draft general plan, You'll notice that in this plan under purple, there is a light industrial park. That's that purple zoning type, or that land use type. In the Harriman General Plan, the draft plan, we're now looking at creating these as more like employment centers, having a little bit larger definition, not just thinking of these as warehousing districts or manufacturing districts, but jobs, employment centers. So we see that different definition, and I think you'll see that land use pattern in a few other places that maybe we haven't had in the past. So again, just be thinking about where might we apply these zones moving forward. Now, I also had attached in my staff report an article that I had come across about this idea of maker districts. Districts that really lend themselves well to synergy, a wide variety of creative, entrepreneurial businesses, things that really generate a lot of excitement and interest. It can be a place where it's not just for employment, but also for entertainment. It allows for all different scales of uses. I think that would take another type of zoning district, not the M1 or the M2. I shared that article with everyone just to see if it resonated with our city and see if there's any interest in exploring that further. I've talked about this idea with a couple of our development partners. It's probably a little more complicated than what a lot of people are kind of considering or thinking about. I think right now our development partners are more interested in, let's just kind of have a slim version of the M1 and let's just start applying that in some of our commercial districts. But again, we're kind of losing the retail point of sale element, I think, in doing that. So there's a little bit of a trade-off there. There's a lot of interest in doing that type of product. There's a lot of, you've seen up in Daybreak even, there's a tilt-up product that's going up just north of the Smiths off of Mountain View Corridor. So we're seeing more and more of that in our market because that is successful. People want to build them, they're profitable, and they're getting occupied. So with that introduction, is there any feedback as we work on finishing up the manufacturing amendments and creating an M2 zone? There is one other thing I forgot to mention. The M1 zone currently does not have a maximum height. There is no building height restriction. If our intent is to introduce the M1 zone into areas that are maybe more similar to traditional commercial or other forms of development, it would be our recommendation as staff that we have a building height maximum in the M1 zone at least. If we're still comfortable having no maximum for the M2, and just basically let the market dictate, how tall a building might get in the M2 zone, that may be appropriate. But we think that the M1 zone probably should have a building height maximum.
Any comments, questions?
I think an incubator space would fit well within the maker space or maker zone. I haven't researched specifically an incubator zone. I've seen them as districts as it's almost like an incentive program, an incentivized program. It's more of a program than a zone. That's kind of how I've seen them done in the past. I don't know, Jackson, if you've had any experience with those in other places in the country. Okay. I haven't seen an actual incubator zoning district before. But I would say that use would fit well into that type of a zoning district.
Michael, on medical or dental, would it not fit in an M2 also? Like large manufacturing of dental products or things like that? It's not.
Yeah, not listed.
It's not listed.
Again, this was just our first blush as staff, just thinking about if we have kind of a, I know we had some concern. For example, we had a manufacturer that welded stair parts that went in next door to the Lifehouse Dance Studio. And we looked at that. We wondered about how much noise would be generated by that, how much dust.
And didn't
how did
staff
they
go down to
mitigate
visit
it?
their other facility?
Yeah, we went and looked at their other facility. So, you know, and we've also have had some concern from some of the construction activity and some of the soil processing activity that's happened in that part of the city, where people were complaining about, hey, I'm a manufacturer, I need a clean facility, and yet I can't keep up with all the dust that's coming in through our ducts because of all of the kind of the dirtier kind of manufacturing activities that are going around them. And so I think our first blush was thinking, you know, medical, dental services probably would not fit well with some of these heavier manufacturing uses.
Well, I just mean like a dental or medical manufacturer, like for instance, there's one over in probably South Jordan, I think it's called Ultra Dent or something. It's a very large facility. They manufacture different dental products and things like that.
Yeah, again, they're going to be looking for a very clean, controlled, you know, environment for that type of manufacturing.
Makes sense.
Is the, in general, is the idea of introducing a building height in the M1 zone appropriate? And I don't know that we've really thought through if that's 30 feet or 35 feet. You know, we know that the marketplace, this is, you know, pretty typical. It's not very often that we see, you know, a taller product like that. Up and down I-15, we're seeing these pretty.
If we put it next to homes, I think that probably is the max height you want to go.
But a home is 35.
True.
Yeah.
So you have to be able to go at least as high as a home, I would think.
Yeah, that's a good comment.
Yeah, but then I think the other area, if it's out in the area that's not next to homes, you could probably go 3 stories, and then they can bring it in for an exception if they're wanting something different or.
Yeah, like that.
Okay.
So I could definitely see, because I'm thinking about right across on the other side of, I think it's Redwood, they have similar type facilities they're building, and those are larger. And that's right on the other side. So I think there could be exceptions to it depending on where it's located. I mean, you look at some of these hills that are pretty steep, you could build it 3 stories and the people behind it aren't even affected if there's homes or things up there. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if there aren't any other comments, then obviously our next step is to complete this draft, and we'll initiate the review with the public and the Planning Commission.
Awesome.
Okay. Is there any comments with anyone online, or are you guys good? I'll assume that's good. Okay. Thank you, guys. All right. Let's move on to item 1.3, which is a discussion of the Harriman City Code to review ordinances relating to multifamily design guidelines. And Michael, it looks like
So I'm going to introduce this one, but Clint Spencer, our new planning manager from Ogden, actually had worked on revising their multifamily design standards, and I think you said it took about a year to go through that process. And he actually prepared several of the slides in this presentation.
Where's tech?
Yeah, we don't have it loaded for some reason. It's coming.
Jackson, have you guys been able to see the screen so far or no?
Oh.
So they haven't been able to see anything yet, Michael.
Well, you didn't miss much on the last one, so that's okay.
Yeah, most of it was from what
Just a
was
couple of
sent out.
maps. Let's make sure that our online attendees can see this next presentation, though.
I saw him running too. He wasn't sure he wanted anyone else touching his computer.
They said they weren't able to see this online.
The last one, they weren't either. Jackson, are you able to see anything online right now? Oh, so they're not seeing the presentation. They're just seeing everyone here.
Okay.
How about now?
All right. Clint, thank you. Are you going over this one?
Yeah,
gonna
I
start.
will,
Okay.
just briefly. And I may be whipping a tired horse. Some of you may have seen this image or heard me give this little speech, but you know, I'm like a lot of people who are not familiar with Harriman when I came to this community 3 years ago. It was shocking. You know, the impression I think most people have of Harriman, if you don't live here, if you don't come here, if you haven't been here in the last 10 years, you know, the image is large lot, you know, not very diverse community. Coming here, it was just absolutely amazing to see the level of growth and density that this community has accepted in some places. Obviously not everywhere, probably in more places than some people want. One of the things that I observed initially is as a community, for various reasons, we have accepted a level of density in this city that is quite unusual for a suburban location. And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I'm offering it freely, I'm not sure that we really derived some of the benefits that could have come from density. And I like this image because I think it to me, it kind of represents that. Now, people might look at this and say, I like rural, I like suburban, I don't really want to live in a more urbanized center like this. And I appreciate that. My point is, if you have density, at least we should be trying to, we should obtain the benefits that density brings. For example, during COVID, it became very evident that we have very, very few places to gather outside of our parks. And even our parks for a while were closed to us. You know, were very limited to us. You know, we basically had our sidewalks. That's all we had left in our trails. But this image to me represents that intersection of public and private, the synergy that can happen, the benefits that we create from this density as we do create places that where we can meet. Yes, this is a little town square, but we also obviously see shops around the corner, that corner coffee shop or, you know, little diner or whatever it is, a service. You know, and we're trying to do some of this right here in town center, in the Harriman Town Center. But we've done this enough times in other places that we probably could have emitted forums more like this had our policies, our design guidelines encouraged our development partners to do things like this. That would have been my recommendation. Now, moving forward on talking about design standards for multifamily, I don't know if we want to amend our site planning to try and achieve things more like this, where there is some synergy between land uses, both public and private. Traditionally, what we see in our development partners is they have a phase of development. They build a wall, and they have private amenities, and they're kind of their own little world. And maybe that's fine. I would just recommend, I think this is better, because it creates an amenity for both the tenant and the larger community, and it creates a place where we can have community itself. So that's kind of my introduction to this topic, but I'll turn the time over to Clint, and you could share with us some of your observations and your experience through your previous work.
All right, well, it's good to be with everyone. Some new faces in the room. For those that don't know me, I'm Clint Spencer. I've been working in Harriman now for the past, since February 1st. I've worked in Orem for about the first 14 years of my career, moved to Ogden for the past 5, and now I'm here. I live in Eagle Mountain, so the commute here versus Ogden is much appreciated. So I'm going to go over just a little bit of the discussion and maybe give some background and understanding on what we faced in Ogden and why we developed some more standards for design, and not just looking at the outside of the building, but as Mike kind of talked to, speaking more towards amenities and those kinds of things. So up here you can see this is an example of what we consider as good architecture, something that you're proud of, something that when you come home to, you can say, yes, I live in a nice community, in a nice building. And the building to the right, this is an affordable, it's an income-driven development. So it's low-income housing, but it doesn't look like it's a low-income housing type of situation. People that live there can be proud of the place that they live. One of the issues we faced in Ogden is our design standards were very low, and we had one of these developer groups that came through, and they went through and picked all these little pieces of odd properties, and then they would develop these multifamily developments there that didn't really fit in with the community, didn't really connect. They were basically providing a bedroom and a parking space for people that wanted to live there. And as more of these went up, this condition came more and more evident to the city council, and so that's what kind of kick-started this whole discussion. And so, I was driving home from work one day, and that discussion came up in a podcast. As we look at all these housing needs and making places for people to live, when we create these multifamily types of developments, so what are we really creating for people? Are we creating a space where they can really live, or is it just a place where they can, come and go from? Is there any amenity on site that they can enjoy? Is there anything that they can, be proud of in calling their home? A lot of us that have single-family homes, I can go home to my house. I have an outside yard. I can recreate there. I can have pets. I can do all sorts of things. I can do my laundry in my own house, which a lot of people in other multifamily developments don't have the option to. Now this picture here, these pictures represent kind of the bad. And when at first glance, they might not look terrible. But the reason that I classify these as bad is because this is kind of typical development throughout Utah. This is what, this is everywhere Utah or everywhere USA. It doesn't really state a place. It does, these buildings could be anywhere throughout the state. And Ogden, being the city that they are, and I believe Harriman as well, being the city that it is, wants to create some kind of identity, something that says when you're in Ogden, you're in Ogden. You have a certain level of architecture or some kind of design that says you've arrived in Ogden. This city, this building obviously belongs to Ogden because of the architecture and the standards that it emits. Versus these buildings that say, this could be. It could be Taylorsville, it could be Sandy, it could be wherever Utah. And further, they don't have great architecture if you look a little bit closer. And then there's the ugly, right? These are buildings that are obviously outdated, that were probably popular at the time. I think that one of the things that we saw in Ogden and we see statewide really is a sense of different fads of development. What kinds of what's the latest fad? What's the latest trend that's being put up? And then over time, obviously, it gets outdated. These fads come and go, and they become outdated. And people don't take pride in ownership. They don't take care of the properties, and they become places that are undesirable to live anymore. These breezeway buildings, I think, for a long time have been very popular, and I think that those have become issues. Those are the things we saw in Ogden as well. But working through this process with our city council and our planning commission, one of the things they wanted to create was, with multifamily especially, was some kind of architecture that stood the test of time, right? Not something that just represented a fad of the time, but looking at a building and saying, was that built 30 years ago, 40 years ago? Well, I don't know if we want to look at anything and say that was built in the 70s, but just the sentiment that could have been there for 100 years, or it could have been there for 5 years. We don't know. And that's kind of the idea, that we don't want to, in terms of historic preservation, we don't want to try to mimic that, but we want to try to capture that essence and that idea of just classic architecture that really will not phase out in a few years. So these are some of the discussion points, and I've gone over some of them in just what I've talked about. But one of the things that we need to consider is, do we want to just maintain the status quo, right? Do we want to just have a building that could be anywhere Utah, or do we want to start developing something that obviously belongs in Harriman? Right now we have a high standard for single-family homes that require a lot of brick. Ogden was the same way. We considered ourselves a brick city. The downtown area, largely brick, all historic development. And so is that something that Harriman wants to consider? Is that something that we want to look at as we look at updating these multifamily design standards? And then again, looking at development trends versus best practices or places worth caring about. The next discussion point was looking really at the amenity space. As I mentioned before, a lot of these buildings that we see, and even some that are in Harriman here, all they're really providing is a parking space and a bedroom for people to live. And I think of my kids, and I don't think that they're going to be able to afford a single-family home in Harriman right out of the gate, nor probably anywhere Utah, but they're going to end up possibly in one of these types of living or establishments. And for a long time, I think there's been kind of a negative connotation of those type of people, those people that live in apartments, those people that live in multifamily. But for a lot of those people, that's a choice. That's what they want to live in. They don't want to have the maintenance of a single-family home. They don't care to have the yard that they have to mow every weekend. They want to be able to, go do whatever they want to do. And so when we consider, whether it's the people that are forced to live in something that's not single-family, although I know of like several rents that are more than my mortgage, are we really creating a space that those people can live? And should we be creating a space where they can live? Being able to do, just doing basic things, doing the laundry in your own home versus having to go to a central community, or having an outdoor space. A lot of things that we saw or even that we see in many communities. So we have these landscaping standards, right, where people provide a landscape plan and it has all this grass and trees, but it's not really usable. There's no paths. There's nothing that makes it usable other than, till it's pretty to look at, and it's a nice, maybe it's a nice feel for buffering or for those kinds of things, but to go out and really use that space, there's nothing that is going to drive somebody to go out and sit on the grass or versus where if you had a bench and a path or just simple amenities like even a fire pit or something like that, where people could go out and really enjoy and take advantage of something that folks in a single-family home could enjoy. So those are some of, and the way we looked at it in Ogden was also just based on the size. The larger the size, the more amenities were required, right? And we had there's provisions for sizes of workout facilities or the sizes of outdoor amenities that we would require, and we gave several options for people to kind of pick and choose from, and they had to meet so many criteria to make these places really livable. The next one I think is really important as well, and it speaks kind of to what Mike was talking about, is how do these buildings really fit into our communities? And a lot of it has to do with, how do they address the street? I was just walking up to the Holiday here, whichever I think is that direction, for lunch, and I noticed there's that multifamily, or it's a townhome development, and as I was walking by, I noticed that there's no sidewalk connection out to the public sidewalk. For people to go from there to the public sidewalk, I assume they have to go through their community, out the main entrance, and then over to the public sidewalk. And so as we put these places in place, what kind of connection do they have to the rest of the community? And then interior to that, what kinds of spaces do they have, to create a community interior to their development? Are we creating these, like Mike said, are we creating these quasi-public spaces where people can come and enjoy? Just quickly off the cuff, there's a development that we'll be considering in the Planning Commission on May 6th, and it's a commercial building, but they have taken a large acre. They're going to put their parcel or their building on one part, but on the other part, they're going to create a large landscaping amenity, and it'll be open to the public. People can go in and enjoy that, and those are the kind of spaces that I think that we, as a community, want to create. These places where people can go and enjoy, and this would be placed right in the middle of a commercial and residential area where several people can enjoy it and take advantage of that, and I think those kinds of places, in terms of connectivity, would be important as we build community and not just build places. Another thing we looked at is, and this is maybe not something that is as applicable to Harriman, but the closer you were to downtown, the fewer amenities you had to have, being that downtown was your amenity. Your connection to the downtown, commercial entities, entertainment opportunities, those kinds of things decreased as your distance from those increased, or decreased anyways. Something else we looked at, and I think this is true for Harriman, if my wife was here, she would speak to this, but everything, you get into these large developments, and every building is the same. And maybe the color changes a little bit, maybe there's a different roof pitch, but, and this is, speaking specifically, I drive by up and down Mountain View every day, and I see all these communities where there are just hundreds of buildings, and they all look the same. And I know that, when I've gone to places, my parents get confused when they come to my house because my neighbor's house has a little different, it's similar, there's a little different roof pitch, but they pulled into my neighbor's house before not knowing it was mine. And so just having a sense of identity of, this is my place, this is where I live, and, it's one of the things we looked at there was, when you get beyond a certain acreage, do we want to require different building types? And not necessarily limiting units or those kinds of things, but just limiting how the structures look and how they perform and how they appear to the outside, so people can really, take pride and have an identity of where they live, and this is the building I live in, and breaking up those development types to provide kind of more of a better context of community. So I've been kind of long-winded, but hopefully I've given some ideas in terms of what you might want to see for Harriman, what things are important for your city, and just again echoing Mike. I know that every community is different. I know that Harriman is not Ogden, and nor it should be. But as you have looked at multifamily issues and multifamily development, what are things that have concerned you, and what things do you think the ordinance should address? So.
Yeah. And I'll go through and maybe it's just reiterating, but the things that came to my mind as you talked about this, and it's really looking at, as a city, what kind of transitions we want to see between different development types and when it's appropriate, because it isn't always appropriate, obviously, to have a transition from light industrial to homes, but obviously it is in areas. Density and amenities that come with that, to where it changes what's offered. Trim, design standards, however you want to put that, connectivity overall. You didn't mention this, but I think it's very applicable, especially when we talk about multifamily, is commercial and accessibility to it, because there tends to be, with some multifamily, they tend to use more public transportation and other things like that, which I don't think is exactly the case in Harriman, but you would know better than I, and so transit as well, and then just overall material stuff. And so that was some of the thoughts that I had, but I know there's a lot of feedback, and I know on the Planning Commission, one of the things that we've brought up is actually increasing the standards of multifamily while keeping and maintaining the standards of the single family, in order to make it to where, yes, you can build multifamily, that's fine. It's a lot higher standard. And so, and some of the thought, I think, at least from my perspective, and I'd love to hear everybody's opinion, is because there tends to be more of a transit type community. You don't get one person that lives there for 30 years. And so in order to keep it nicer, if you have a higher standard, it tends to help with that. And so that's one thought that I have, but I'd love to at least hear, because I think this is really important, especially for the the future of Harriman on some of what's going in. We only have a few areas that really we can still have an impact on. There's a lot that already has their MDAs in place and everything else that we can't have as much. We can do guidance with maybe where we'd like to see some of this, but we are limited in some areas. So that's at least some of my thoughts on this one.
I absolutely think that we need to consider design standards for, we've talked about this at the council level as well. You know, one of the questions I've had in my mind for really a lot of years, and even from my time on the planning commission, which, you know, was why is it that, you know, in a single family development, whether it's through the HOA, CC&Rs, whatever it is, you know, we require that you can't have the same house, the same elevation next to or across the street, but yet when it comes to multifamily, everything's the exact same. You know, should there be something in there? And I really like the idea of, you know, having some architectural diversity in terms of within even a given development of that, again, to help really change the look and feel of that. Because again, you know, you drive down Mountain View Corridor and look at some of our multifamily, and again, all you see is the sea of this type of product, and then right next to it is a sea of a different type of product. There's no transition, there's no flow. And I think that again, in terms of the look and feel of our community, we have to look at that, and we should look at that, and how we make those transitions, and how we make that integrate into, again, what it is a community we want that look and feel to be.
Great point.
Yeah, I would just echo a lot of what's been said. I felt like at the last meeting we talked about that what we really wanted was see higher standards for multifamily. So I guess I'm just questioning, when will we see those? When will we start to see those? Because I feel like that was kind of the guidance before. Was I incorrect in thinking that? But I really think that this is the important way to go, and the diversity and things like that you just talked about. Just I
Right.
just agree to move it down the line.
Thank you, Sherry, for that comment. So what you have in your packet is a collection of what our current design standards are, both in the city code, and then we reference these medium and high-density design guidelines. And you'll notice, like, for example, in the dwelling group ordinance, we require only 15% of the total area of the front facade or complex to be made up of brick, rock, or stone. Single family is 40%. Now, we've been talking about maybe changing that, and some people want more and some people want less. Last time we talked about that. We highlighted this presentation because it kind of moves the design guidelines in a slightly different direction. If any of those concepts kind of resonate with you, we'll need to develop different design guidelines than what we have right now to try and achieve some of those things. But if all we want to do is increase the amount of brick we have on a building, that's easy. We just increase the standard in the code. It's already there. We just add a higher percentage. If we want to have more variety, I think we can do that. That's pretty easy. Some of these site planning things are a bit harder, but we didn't know if that's something you want us to work on.
Yeah.
If it isn't, we won't go there. And we'll just, look at, like I said, just adjusting some of the metrics that we already have as a city in this packet.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of great ideas here, and I'd like to see some of that come back as far here's some suggestions, here's some recommendations of directions we should go. I don't really, I'm not big on, well, it has to be 40% of this or 40% of that. If you're talking about a brick building, that's a different thing, but slapping some fascia on the front to say, oh, this looks like brick and things like that, that to me doesn't necessarily say this is great design, this is great standards. There's some really good products out there that aren't brick or stone that have come a long way. So it's like, I don't know that has to be our criteria, but I believe that the concept for myself anyway is that because, for all the reasons Chris just mentioned, that it is typically people who don't live there as long. And it's nothing stamped about the people that live there. I mean, most of us, you get out of high school and you probably live in an apartment. That's forever been the case. Well, I don't know forever, but for a long time anyway. So I don't think it has anything to do with with the people or anything. It's just typically people transition through their life through different phases of housing. And usually this type of housing is a little bit more affordable. So if we have the design guidelines up here, that changes that a little bit, but it also allows it to last longer in our community. So we're not going through some of the pictures you just showed, right? Now, I think a lot of it is personal taste, for just like you were saying. This is fads. This is what's in right now. Even the picture you showed on the very first, the one on the left, yeah, it's beautiful, and that was beautiful architecture and things like that. But the color design and things like that, that's very right now. The brick building on the other side, that's pretty classic. It's that kind of stuff you'll see forever. But it just depends on people's taste and things that you cycle through for a while. But I think it's just the quality of products that go into them is the biggest thing to see if there's going to be longevity in it. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Yep.
Is it, I just wanted to talk to the amenities component of it really quick. I feel like, and maybe I'm wrong, you guys can certainly correct me, I feel like though as some of these new multifamily developments coming in, that they're doing a fair, I'll say an okay job in terms of providing more amenities in there. And it's not just a parking spot and a bedroom, because I think that the expectation has increased significantly over time of what people at least are expecting when they go into, a multifamily housing development, that there has to be some of those outdoor spaces provided for them for kids, whether it's, play lots or whether it's a pool or whether it's some type of a gathering space. I feel like they're doing okay, again, compared to what we did. I guess I'd like to hear from everyone else whether we think the amenities component of that we need to be requiring more or not. Because again, I think we generally, and you guys are seeing most of those obviously coming through your agendas in the Planning Commission as you're seeing those site plans and how they're laid out and what amenities are there. Do you think that they're providing enough?
No, I
Go
don't.
ahead. I'll say I think more have gotten there, but only because we've had to fight them to get there. I don't think anybody's ever very few have come with a good plan for amenities or design out of, we fought Edge on this last U. How long did we fight Edge to get them to a place that we were comfortable with? They didn't come with a plan to make that more. We had to fight them to get there, and I think if we had a standard that they could start at that point, and amenities have gotten a lot better, right? Absolutely have gotten a lot better, but I just don't think we're there yet with as far as
So some of my thought is, when we go into these multifamily, we tend to have a lot more density, obviously. And the one thing that we're seeing is, yes, there are some parks that go in. Yes, there are pocket parks. Yes, they meet the minimum requirements of what the city has established. Now, sometimes that is shoved in a corner that 3/4 of the development will never use because of how it's designed. And so, at least,
time it's the drainage.
Yeah.
and it is. It is. That's usually what comes through is, this is going to be the park/drainage.
Yep.
And it comes through oftentimes. And there were a couple thoughts that came to my mind, because I really respect what Sherry said about the townhomes and different things like that. But I think the better question we need to ask ourselves is, do we have enough townhomes at the standard we've established prior? Do we need to up the standard for what else is going to be coming in the future? Because that's sort of what my thought was. Do we need to increase the standard of, yes, if you're building a townhome community or multifamily, you're going to be required to have more open space. You're going to be required to have more brick or stone. You're required to have a higher product, because our community has enough of that already, we feel like. And so if that's coming in, you have a lot higher standard than we used to have.
Yeah, for me, I don't know, it's just an idea, but it's like if you want to go X amount of units, here's the minimum, not we'll give you bonus density if you do all these things, because I feel like we're fighting to get things instead of saying this is our standard, where if you want to do 100 units apartment complex, this is the percentage of open space you're giving us, and it's centralized. It's a central gathering place. That's what I feel like we miss out, like the pocket parks. Okay, let's shove it in the corner where we have the detention pond, put a playground there. That's not a central gathering place. That's a place for the people that are just around that live around there that are actually going to utilize it. So that's my thoughts is like, if you kind of have it set by units, like if you want to go 300 units, here's our requirements for what we expect. If you want to go 4,
I think
four.
it's fair, Brody, to look at our development behind us.
Yeah.
It's a central park. There will be central commercial around it. There's even going to be live-work units around it. There's what the brick buildings are. They're different. We don't have that in the city, and that was what 6 months of going back and forth. Easy to say no, we're not going to have what you have in every single community you've ever built. And it shouldn't be that long of a back and forth. There should be a higher standard. And I mean, if we didn't have enough townhomes, we might say, no, we don't. Maybe we need to adjust it the other way. We don't have enough townhomes in our community. But I don't know if anyone here can say we don't have enough townhomes and multifamily in our community. And so that's why, at least for me, I look at it from the perspective of we only need to increase our standard for that now. We need to increase the standard for open space. We need to increase the standard for what building materials we have on these. And obviously that's my opinion, but I feel like we have adequate for the needs of the community in that type of unit. And what's coming, there's still a lot coming that hasn't been
That will
built.
come under the old standard.
And the master development agreements have a lot of them that are coming in the
Yeah.
future with those.
Yeah, good
And that's why, at least from my perspective, that's how I sort of look at it.
Well, and we've had discussions about even not downgrading single family, but make like you said, the quality of materials higher for multifamily, so we incentivize more single family.
Yeah.
And see, I even, with something like this, if we have, yes, this is the density, but if they put them just a tad smaller in the same space and gave us 5 or 10 acres more of park for that community, that's an amenity that's worthwhile to them. And we're not getting that. We're just not getting it.
Well, and I think too, I don't remember who touched on it. There's kind of that, you touched on it, kind of that negativity towards, even you get on social media, it's a negativity towards the people that live in those. And it's not, it's taken out that way, but I think there's just a frustration with the design of some of these buildings in the city. That's more what it is, the lack of parking, the lack of space. To me, like this, I wouldn't even bat an eye walking by, driving by something like this. In Ogden, we've talked about that. That's my favorite, just north of the Eccles Theater there, where they put that mixed use. I didn't even know the density was there. I didn't even know the apartments were above that. You don't notice it because it's so well planned out. You don't notice that density, right? It's just, you don't notice the traffic. You don't notice, the busyness of it. It feels natural. It feels good. And I think that's what we've missed out on I think people are frustrated that it's the same. It looks they call it row housing. It's not the people that live there. It's just been so poorly designed that no parking, street parking becomes an issue. So I think people would get more on board with this if it was designed properly.
I've got a couple thoughts, and I appreciate. Sorry, I apologize late, but I was listening online on my way in. Couple of thoughts. So one, back to what we talked about yesterday with private roads. This is one of the main reasons why I feel like we need to have city standard be what's required on a private road. And I get that there's some give and take on that, but by requiring that we allow parking on both sides, we remove a lot of the issues that we have in regards to the benefit to developers for putting in super dense, super close, because they can cram in more housing. And so I'm, as far as standards are concerned, and this is something that we talked about yesterday, but that's kind of where I come on, like, for example, the city, just the pavement in itself on the road. But I also look at things that, and I kind of want the Planning Commission's thought on this as well. I look at the back of the housing, all these townhomes down Mountain View Corridor, and why is it just a wall of stucco? Why? We say if it's visible from the street, that stuff is very visible from Mountain View Corridor.
Yeah.
Why wasn't that accounted? In my opinion, 100% brick and stone on multifamily. Like, that's my opinion. I know I'm not going to get 100% brick and stone. I want 100% brick and stone. I look at Park City and look at some of the things they've put up there where everything is stone or everything is brick, and it looks good for a long time. Now, if it looked like it was from the 70s, okay, maybe. But
Depends what brick they had, right?
yeah, that was the brick at the time, right? But, you know, red brick all over the place, long term, it becomes hard to tell when was it actually built, right? And so, particularly in regards to multifamily developments, increasing that standard and requiring more, including the amenities, including everything else, not just the brick and stone, but the whole shebang, to where if you want the benefit of getting all the value that comes from putting in a high-density, multifamily type development, you have to provide the value to the city as well. You don't just get to take, you're giving before you get. And that's, I think, been a lot of the problem, is we have standards that have not required that, so that when you drive down Mountain View Corridor, all you see is stucco wall with hundreds and hundreds of windows, as opposed to having something back there that requires some diversity, that breaks it up, that makes it to where it looks like they're individual units and not literally just one wall with windows.
I want to second that, because I feel like multifamily, I mean, we really treat it where people are in that space, right? No one's going to go in your backyard if you have a single family home, but if you're in a townhome, apartments, people are around it. I think it should be foresighted in its architecture, in my opinion. Like, we worked around the U on the back when they first came to us with those. It was all white stucco, the whole thing. And we pushed back and said, no, like, these are back alley parking. People need to have it look nice all the way around the whole building. And I think that would be my push, is that they use like materials around the whole building, not just on the front. And then the other three sides, it's all stucco.
So, I know we can't talk about this all night, but again, I just want to see big picture. If what the commission and council members here, if you're encouraging us to just basically make a prettier pod, or are we trying to do something where we actually create synergy, where we can actually create community?
Yes. Well,
because this is a real shift in development pattern. This would be significant.
Can I give
Yes.
at least my thoughts? Because as we were going through this, I thought, how would I put an action plan together for this? And that's what I was trying to think through. And to be perfectly honest, I think there would be 2 or 3 immediate changes that are just text changes. We change it. It's percentage of brick. It's diversity of buildings through it. Those things are immediately done. They're done the next month.
We can do that.
And it's simple. It's done. New standard of every single multifamily coming in, they're looking at it and saying, okay, now everything's changed on me. It is what it is. And then when we look at a more encompassing, we understand that's going to take longer.
Yep.
And it's going to be a back and forth, and maybe 1 or 2 more meetings like this, because I think there's different ideas of what that means that needs to be defined. And to be honest, we have a couple pretty pictures, but I still don't have in my mind where you guys are thinking about what that means. Because I looked at the good, the bad, the ugly, for no better words.
Yeah.
And I looked at them and said, well, I think it's okay, and then that's bad, and then that's ugly. I didn't look at the first one as quite having the amenities, and maybe I'm considering or comparing it to what we have behind us coming in too. Because that is what I consider probably a good for that type of higher multifamily design.
Let me just share this maybe big picture perspective. Soleil Lofts is really quite an amazing project. Many of us were here. We saw that project go through the Planning Commission. We've seen it be built. It's an amazing project. But all of those amenities are really for all of the residents that live within Soleil Lofts. There's not, again, we didn't create any place where there's an intersection between the broader community. The residents who live outside of Soleil Lofts don't really derive any benefit from it. Now, maybe we don't really care about that, but so many of us have worked from home during this last year. I mean, have you not thought, man, I wish there was a place I could go and hang out, or I could have a lunch appointment with somebody right here in Harriman? And I know we're all looking for sit-down restaurants, But you don't really feel comfortable going and hanging out at a sit-down restaurant for 2 hours. I mean, you
I
need
do.
places that foster that. And I'm just suggesting that you have, again, we've accepted the density. We could have created places like this had we had the right design standards, and if this was our goal, our objective. But, I think in the past, we've just said, let's put a wall around it, let's give them the density, that's like their own little enclave, we're done. And it's a very different mindset to do things like this, that foster community. But again, and I agree, Chris, I think I like your idea. Let's do a quick amendment, unless others don't agree. I kind of like that. Let's make a few of these quick adjustments to the standards. And then maybe let's revisit this in a larger conversation.
I think we do some trainings. Let's spend some more of our work meeting. I think this needs to come out of the commission, and I think we've got fantastic people on
And
the
that way we
commission.
can have a recommendation to the city
then a
council, and then
recommendation.
they'll dive into it.
Well, let's spend some couple of work meetings working on this, training. I don't know enough
Okay.
to,
There's some education that's going to be needed for us as well.
So I think this is
agree.
what we want. I
agree
think
with
this is
Lauren.
what we all envision. I just don't know how to write it into
And again,
to code.
if this doesn't resonate, we won't do it. But if we want to do it, it's going to take
I think
work.
that's Jackson. Hold on, there's a couple comments online. I can't see who has comments. Is that Jackson or Jared or? Was there a comment from someone online, or is that just background? Okay.
So the form-based code is a growing tool that some of our cities, our neighboring cities, are using. Really, you're coding how buildings relate to one another and relate to public and private spaces. You're more concerned about the shape and design of the space, and you're less concerned about what is being used, how the building is being used. The neat thing about form-based coding is it allows a lot of flexibility in use. So if a period of time there's more desirability to have more commercial use in a building, it allows for that. If it needs to adjust where we have more residential units in a building, you can do that. It's not prescribed how you use the building, it's more the design of the building. It's how it relates to the broader community in general. Now, most cities who have form-based coding, they will also have a limited amount of uses that are prohibited. You'll always have a restriction on certain uses, so it's not a free-for-all, but it does allow for more market-based response as far as how you use the building. We're more concerned about how it's designed, how it interacts and interfaces with the community, the broader community. That's how form-based coding works.
Sherry, did you have a
Yeah,
comment?
I guess it just, I'll play, sorry. Go ahead.
I wrote a form-based code for the 9th South Track Station in Salt Lake City, and it completely turned that entire neighborhood around. It was amazing to see the level of investment because it was very attractive, very well received by the marketplace.
I do like the idea of obviously making some of those quicker term changes and then a deeper dive, because what it does is it signifies to the development community that we're looking at it. It signifies that we are making some changes and that there could be more to follow with that and allow us the time to do it. But I think that there's certainly some of those quicker changes that we can make that will have a positive effect on what those developments look like.
So I just wonder about, like, I don't know where this is. Where's this picture taken from?
Uh,
Real pictures.
Looks
it-
similar to
it is
Farmington a
real
little bit.
picture. I think it's a
Farmington
community in
Station,
Washington. I just found it on the internet.
Is that, just a question, technical question, is that one development?
That's exactly like you mentioned Soleil Lofts. Well, they're an HOA community, right?
They are.
And so they're all paying fees to utilize the amenities in that
Right.
community. That's why it's like, in theory, this is great, but if I'm paying an HOA fee in the community I live, I don't want everyone in the whole world to be able to come and use
Yep.
my amenities. It's costing me money every month, right? And so I think that that's the difference that we have, because we have created these little pockets of, these little pods of things, and those pods come at an expense via HOA fee to all the residents in those, so they don't want to share that because they're paying for that.
Right. I really like the look and feel of this, but.
Yeah, me too.
Based on honestly, how I kind of interpret that picture is it looks to me like that's more of a public
It is.
space.
Yeah.
It is.
With obviously design guidelines have been applied to the buildings that surround that, but it's not a developed townhome or multifamily
Right.
community, as Sherry just mentioned, that says those people are all paying for this public space or the amenities that are in there. And of course, they're gonna say when they see somebody that, if they see a bunch of traffic coming in to use their space, they're gonna be like, I kind of have an issue with that.
Yeah, or you get a key to use the pool or things like that because you pay the fee to utilize that. So it's great in theory, but the way that we have our city designed, those kind of things don't work if you're going to have HOAs designed and people paying
Well,
fees for it.
there's one idea that came to my mind as I thought about some of this type of stuff. So when we went to San Francisco last time, there's a park that's super long. I wish I remember the name of it, but it's super long, goes all the way down to the beach. It's wide, it narrows down, it's wide. It's like forever. And our community has a couple spots that could have something similar to that. I even think about when you go up Provo Canyon, the parks that sort of go along the trail. There's a park here. You go up a little farther, there's park here, there's park here. And there's a connectivity that provides a sense of community with those different parks. And for us, we don't have a ton of spots that have free reign to be able to do that as easily, but we still have a couple areas that potentially could happen. I think about west of the high school that there may be a way to still have a really good connection and have it widen out in spots. I mean, these pocket parks, I understand the communities, but if you have a big park that, they walk a little bit further, get to the park, and then they can go down the path and get to another park and go down the path and get to another one. And I mean, that trail leads all the way under Mountain View. And so,
I agree.
so it's just,
But how are you gonna fund those types of, those are city amenities.
I'm on the planning commission. I don't think about the money.
I love what you're saying. But as we start to
No,
talk about
and I
amenities
agree.
And the use and the financing of them, I mean, that becomes very, very challenging
Wendy will
to
get a
do
grant.
that.
Wendy will get us a grant.
What's that?
We're trying to accomplish that in some areas, right?
Absolutely.
Juniper Crest and Midas, we're doing the paths with the parks, we're tying all that in. I think it gets a little more complicated for us in areas like this, though, where we don't have the space, we don't have the ability to connect all of those
Yeah.
places.
Yeah, I know, even in our area, I was saddened because we moved from over in the, by Friendship, right? And there's trails everywhere, that connect everywhere because it was a big planned thing,
Yep.
right? But then in our area, there's no connectivity, there's no trails or anything like that, right? It's just, there is none. Because different people developed at different times and it was never required to say, well, we wanted to see this area have the same as the rest of the city and some connectivity and some trails, which is unfortunate, I think. But we have some ability on some of these others to try and see that and make that connectivity to our trail systems.
So just to respond to your comment about Soleil Lofts, I'm not suggesting that the way that project should have been developed in its present form, that we would have said, oh, and we want the broader public to be able to come in and use your clubhouse and your pool and all that
Nice
stuff.
pool.
No, but now let's turn this around and think about City Creek. City Creek is a private mall that is designed specifically to allow the public in, right? Because they're trying to achieve a benefit. They want the public to be there because it's a commercial space.
Right.
Obviously, whether this is a public or private space, they have some commercial activities that they want the public to be there, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even if we had gotten 1 or 2 coffee shops in this community where you can go get your donut and hot chocolate, wouldn't have that been a win for us
Yeah.
over the past year? You know, place where you could go and hang out and meet people. That's what I'm talking about. You know, it doesn't have to be just like this, but it's that intersection between public and private. But this is a part of a larger conversation, and I like the feedback that we've had so far.
But one thing
I
to
think-
look at with some of this is if it's, and this is a whole encompassing change and everything like that, but if you look at this multifamily, there are tax dollars along the whole bottom of them. I mean, there are tax dollars to help fund potentially additional amenities, which most communities are, yeah, we just put in 150 townhomes. Well, is there anything to help with that? No. There's, other than the homes, that's all you got tax dollar-wise.
Well, and we need to be realistic. I mean, in the past, when we talked about mixed use, we would typically think all ground floor, commercial, everything above residential. That's what we did right here in the town center. Hasn't been built yet.
Well, we didn't
But
do all
what
of it.
if we
but it
even
was
just got
30,
one corner
32 units.
that
yeah.
was commercial?
Yep.
I mean, even just that one element would have added something to our community somewhere.
Yeah, and by the way,
So I think we gotta be
looked at the
realistic.
live-work units. Those are the only ones that you can't get anymore. They're all sold.
Yes, I've heard
Every
that
one of
that's
the
done very
live-works
well.
are sold.
Yeah. I think we could do more live-work units in this city.
Well, even up in Rosecrest, and I forget the homes, they have a little clubhouse across the street. I think it has like 4 live-work units, and they've done amazing in the community.
It's surprising that we don't get more of them naturally in the marketplace because they always seem to do well.
Well, I think it's because most developers and builders, that's not the direction that we as a body have been pushing them because of lack of understanding and how it fits well, too.
And plus, they have their factor checks already. They
Yeah,
have their
they do.
boxes. You know, their approved plans, their designs, they're done. They don't have to pay for engineering.
It's not one of my 10 plans, so that
Exactly.
doesn't work.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, because Edge didn't know how to deal with it, really. Yeah, they're like, we haven't done this before. What, you know?
Yeah.
But we should be pushing them to figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, not be like, okay, if you can't figure it out, we'll just go with what you know.
So I have one comment. I think that we need to look at this kind of in 2 different ways. I think that we need to look at our design guidelines, but then we also need to think, for the other part, the quality of life. How can we make a better quality of life for our residents?
Yeah.
We want to make it look good, but how can we make a better quality? And I really reflected on that during COVID. Think about people who are stuck in their apartments. You know, with living in a single-family home, I can go and, you know, be free in my own yard. But they don't have that, and I think that we really need to think of what we could do better, and even along those lines, increasing our landscaping standards for, I don't know if we can specify, like break it into, you know, if we could have higher, you need more trees for multifamily.
As long as they're 100% brick and stone trees.
Right? But just little things like that, I think that we
Sense
could
of
really
gathering
create
place.
a better product.
Yeah.
I don't know. I always go back to a central gathering place. Like if you're living in multifamily, I would want to ask the developer, where's your central gathering place? Like where's the sense of community that you're building besides the houses that people live in? Because it's multifaceted for me. It's like you said, a single family home, I have my backyard. I can go, my neighbor has their backyard. An apartment complex, there's just asphalt all around it. It's like nobody knows each other because there's no place for them to go gather unless I invite you to my apartment.
But even parking, that affects your quality of life. We
Yeah.
have a lot of residents that are really frustrated with parking. And I couldn't imagine like driving to my house every day and thinking, am I gonna have a parking spot? When you were saying they have a parking spot and a bed, I was like, sometimes we don't.
Well, and that's just, I mean, even with some of the higher density, if you want to say condos or anything like that, if you have underground parking, you have now a green and open space around it instead of a parking lot around it. There are things, and it's expensive. It's expensive for a builder and developer to do it, but it completely changes the feel and the quality of life.
So one of the considerations that, well, one of the ways that Ogden kind of tackled this as well is, so they came up with a list of, these are the minimum requirements, right? These are the things that we feel like are essential in terms of design, landscape, amenities, et cetera. And then they did have, some options. If you want to have more density, then you've got to do X, Y, and Z. And they didn't make them, it's not like things that weren't difficult, it's like installing more landscaping, or, if you did more, like I think one of the ones was in providing charging stations for electric cars. If you did more than was required, then you could have additional density and things that were really attainable, but just made that development easier and nicer to live in.
Yeah. But in my mindset, at least, I just go back to anything that apartments, multifamily, even townhomes, if you increase the requirements there, we get what we're missing in our community, which is some of the single-family home that we don't have the balance of right now. And so I mean, and people come in and they will still build multifamily. They will still build condos, and they'll say, okay, it's still worth it to me to do that. And so, but then it's a whole different product and quality, so.
Well, I think if we hear something different, our intent then is we'll do a kind of a more interim solution that's quick.
Yeah.
I think based on our conversation today, and then we'll engage the planning commission in some of these, maybe do some training and talk about this larger issue. Maybe even talk about some form-based coding.
So 100% brick and stone, right?
There you go.
Michael?
It's funny, you mentioned 100% brick or stone. I've been watching a little 7-Eleven in Magna that's getting built right now. 100% brick and stone. It's not breaking the bank. They're getting it done. So it can be done.
I have a question on that particular issue. Hardy board. What's the planning commission's thoughts? We get a lot of hardy boards.
Stucco, hardy board, brick and stone.
So to me, hardy board isn't brick or stone. It's not a stone.
No.
So
No.
for me, 100% brick and stone, particularly on these multifamily develop. I mean, I literally look out these doors. I look this right outside, and I'm like, actually, that doesn't look too bad, And then I look right behind them, and I'm like, eh. But these ones that are brick and stone, they look good, and I think long term they're gonna be fun, So particularly in that's my thought.
I think in this amendment, we're going to clarify how that policy or that ordinance has been interpreted. We're going to give more specifics in the ordinance.
And also on that, as you're looking in the short term, all four sides, not just the street facing, because I think what's happened is
They're too close to their neighbors.
Yeah.
I mean, you're
Everybody
literally just
sees
putting
all four
walls.
sides.
So if you make it, I'd like to see what we can come up with for making it all four sides, not just the front, or not just the street facing, because I really believe that. I look at the townhomes I lived in for 10 years here in Harriman, and how close we were, and all we got was stucco, out our back window, and we didn't even get any. We got no change in even from unit to unit. If we were lucky, the color of the unit changed, and that's where for me, no, we've said for too long. Oh well, if it's front face, if it's corner, no. On these bigger lot, we're all four sides.
Michael, could this form-based code be applied to future annexation areas?
Sure, and I think you'll find that for developers who understand it, it actually is something they might opt into. We have so many of our development partners that have vested rights through development agreements, but it's possible we may be creating some new tools that are attractive enough that people may voluntarily jump into maybe some of these newer forms of development.
I just wonder if that committee that you guys discussed last night, if that could be something that could be guided through that. He might be amenable to that, he might be very open to.
And let's just make sure that we're staying on we're not strayed too far from.
I know, I'm just saying, but that committee would involve us too, so.
So at least, and maybe this is just my business side, but what's a realistic timetable to get the couple of changes back to?
Probably, I'm going to say 2 or 3 months. We're going to be -1 planner here shortly, so.
What about just the percentage of brick and diversity?
On the planning commission
So-
agenda next week, we're going to talk about all the legislative requests that we have in front of us.
Okay.
We're going to let you prioritize it. Commissioner.
Well, since I have the council here, at least with this, where does this fall on your priority list?
I'd like to see it done sooner than later.
Okay.
Yeah, this is pretty high for us.
And we can share that priority list when we'll share with the council.
Because for me, the short term is really increasing percentage of brick or stone and diversity of to where you don't have, we have 16 in a row that look exactly the same, or at least the two major things that I think we can adjust and have changed fairly quickly. But I understand with what you're saying. Everything else, I think 3, 6, 9 months maybe. It depends on everything else on the agendas, and I agree with that part.
So while I have the planning commission and council here, let me throw out one more thing that I think that made this ordinance attractive to developers is, so once these standards were in place, the approval process was administrative. It didn't go through any planning commission review, didn't go through city council review. Once these standards were in place, they just they came in, made an application. If they wanted to, if they wanted to make adjustments, they had to go to planning commission for approval. But otherwise, and then, simplifying the process for developers really becomes attractive because they don't like to come to planning commission. They don't want to spend the extra time. So just throwing that out there to see if there's an appetite for that at all, or if this, if this
I
is
think
something
with the
that you want to
short-term
hold.
changes, probably not, but if we have a full overhaul, that may be something that could be considered.
Absolutely.
And that works when you have a lot of specificity in your standards.
Right.
So you know what you're going to get.
So I'll say in regards to that, I'm open to talking about it, but for me, the history we have with development and what we've got is it's the minimum. And when we need to consider something else, if they can just go through administratively, they're going to. I have literally watched a developer in our city put a digital tree in front of an elevation and skew it so that you couldn't tell there were single-car garages on these townhomes, when everyone assumed that it was 2-car garages. And it was presented, and it was one image that was, in a three-dimensional, and there's a tree in front of it, and that makes me concerned because I've watched developers do that in our community. Mm-hmm. Now, are they still doing that? Probably not. I think we've grown up as a city and are watching that a lot more closely. But I'm hesitant to say it's an entirely administrative process. Part of the reason we have the Planning Commission is to beat up the developers and say, hey, no, we need this. No, this curve is going to cause problems. No, this cutout on this, on this drive-through is needed so that they don't go straight into traffic. All of that. I like having community eyes on it, in addition to our professional eyes of our staff who do an amazing job, but probably are looking at things in a different light. And so I'm hesitant. I'm open to talk about it, but I'm hesitant to say, yeah, this is going to be I'd be okay. I just want to set that up. That let's talk about it, but I'd have a lot of.
You're really kind of referencing that in just the design element capacity, right? I mean, they're still going to go through site plans. They're still going to go.
So
or
that
are you
would-
talking the whole process?
The whole kit and caboodle, yeah, the whole site plan. And that, speaking to what Mike said, that's because our ordinance was very specific. It had a lot of,
Well, there has to be a lot of specificity
Yeah,
to
exactly.
it in order to allow that.
right. So, and I just threw that out to see if there's an appetite. If there's not, I'm fine
And
either way.
I think it comes with a comfort level on our part too, of making sure that we're comfortable with that specificity is there, that we don't end up with some of those misses.
And I think if
that have happened.
if you guys overhaul it and we see that everything's coming through and it's like, really all we're doing is approving it now, but I think it becomes a comfort level that it's like, we don't need these to come through anymore.
Yeah.
And so I think that sort of happens by itself if it's prepared properly.
It's really a better process for everyone anyway.
Yeah.
Because the developers know, there's an expectation, here's what we expect, bring it. And if you don't bring it through the building department and the building inspections, it's gonna be like, nope, it's not happening.
Yeah,
So-
there's a couple items
checks and
early on
balances.
when I started on the planning commission that we would see them every other month almost. And then when ordinances were put in place and everything was dialed up, it was just like, we don't need to see these anymore. And
Yeah.
that's taken care of now. And I think that's what really happens when it's done right.
Yeah.
It saves us about 4 hours of staff report time, so.
Yeah, there you go. There you- well, do you not like these meetings?
At least.
So, are there any other discussion on item 1.3? All right, then we'll move on to item 1.4, which is pertaining to storage containers being allowed on residential and commercial properties.
Wow. That's going to be interesting.
Okay, so this is an agenda item that I believe the council had requested for conversation.
It's always
And,
me.
Sherry requested it.
primarily, there was concern about how we, the city or UFA or some, that we're seeing containers being used in the city, but there are residents who are trying to use these containers for accessory or storage purposes, and they're bumping up against the code. And we've had some people saying, why can't I do this? I want to do this. And maybe there's a disparity. Maybe we should have more uniform regulations. So I just wanted to have a broader conversation about these storage containers and trends that are happening in the marketplace. And to be honest, we do have a fair number of residents who call the city and are interested in using storage containers, primarily for accessory structures. Now, I meant to look up the fact, and I didn't get it, but in general, I have been told that there are more of these containers coming into America than are going out. We are an import nation right now. We do more importing than we do exporting. And apparently there are people who are looking to reuse these and to sell them, to lease them, and they're using them in all sorts of examples. And they come in a variety of sizes. Now, some are fairly clean and nice like this. Others are maybe more well-used and rusty and maybe aren't as attractive, if you even think they're attractive at all. Some people do. Some people think that this is a great thing to do, to reuse these structures. Now, interestingly enough, our own building official a year or so ago went through some training specifically about building codes and reuse of these metal containers. She went in, she told me very skeptically. After she went to the training, she was convinced that this can work, that it actually is an efficient structure and can be reused. But the question is, do we as a community want to encourage it, facilitate it? Do we want to regulate it heavily? What do we want to do with it? And in multiple ways. Again, they have different shapes and sizes. In this case, you can see it's being rented out, for these temporary mobile storage units. This one I only grabbed because it seemed like maybe this was sitting in somebody's backyard. I wish they were all nice and shiny and clean like this.
Not the picture they put on the website.
Michael, how tall are they? 10 feet?
They're about 8.5 feet
8.5
typically.
feet?
Yeah.
I'm
They're about, yeah. Now, and it's interesting to see what people are doing with some of these things.
Yeah.
They're getting very creative with them.
Now, there's some
I
beautiful homes
often
here.
kind of wonder, boy, you think the expense of modifying these things would make it prohibitive, but apparently it's not. And I think with all of the, HGTV and all those projects, we're just seeing people who want to be creative and do these fun things. We're seeing people wanting to use them for accessory dwelling units or as, you ever heard the phrase she sheds?
The she shed.
Or man caves, of course, we know that. But people are not necessarily just wanting to use them for a place to sleep or have another apartment on their property. Sometimes they just want a way to get away from the kids and have a space, in their backyard. Currently, this is not easy to do. Harriman is kind of unique in that other cities I work for have been really careful about not allowing utilities to accessory structures. They won't allow power, or not a power meter. They won't allow sewer lines, water. We've been pretty generous as a community. We will let you have all these utility hookups. Now, the reason why other cities don't is they don't want to see it be abused and become an illegal dwelling unit. But for whatever reason, our community, we've said, yeah, you can do these, but we just warn people, you don't have the right to make it a dwelling unit. Now, we all know that there's coming changes. The state's telling us we've got to make changes with dwelling unit, accessory dwelling units, but internal, not detached. This would be something that we would have to choose to do if we wanted to. I went to Vegas on a recent trip and passed through this project. This is a container park.
I love it.
Any of you been here?
Yeah.
This was
It's one of my favorite places in Vegas.
Yeah. When I saw this, I said,
It
oh,
is.
we need to make a Yeti out of metal sculpture right here. And this is, this is that concept of an interim kind of solution. And maybe as the market changes, you do something more intensive. However, this site is fairly intensive, 3 stories. And, you're thinking it's Vegas, it's hot,
But it's these
but it
little
still
personal shops.
is successful.
Yeah, it's these personal little shops,
Yeah,
and it's unique.
yeah, it's
and-
quite amazing.
Yeah.
So, and I wanted to share these images because I think sometimes we have a knee-jerk response, like, we don't want those in our community.
Well,
We want
Springville's got something
Yeah,
like this
really
now,
cool.
too.
Oh, I haven't seen that.
Yeah.
I haven't seen
Yeah,
that.
right.
Yeah, I got pictures of it.
So I thought it was quite amazing. And then I went and saw the smaller one in Phoenix called the Churchill. Not anywhere near as large and much newer. This only opened about 2 years ago, not too long before COVID even. But it has this nice gathering space in the middle. You can see they have a little performance stage. And again, it's these places of hanging out, right, that I think we're hungry for as a community. They can be used as places of, not just an accessory dwelling, but as a primary dwelling. And just to give you, this is the same shot. You can see how it relates to the street. And this is the interior. So it can be done, very, very attractively.
I think I saw something online that Salt Lake was doing just exactly that.
Yeah.
Stacked.
Yeah. So if we're talking about how do we want to regulate these things, right now, if somebody wants to bring a metal container into their rear yard, we treat it just like any other accessory structure in that we say, okay, you have to have similar colors and material to your existing home. And typically that means you're probably going to have to reskin the building. And obviously if you're putting a new skin on top of the metal container, your cost savings starts to quickly disappear. And we get a lot of pushback from residents. They don't want to do that. Now, it's possible that taking the temperature on this topic, maybe there are more residents who are saying, you know what, I don't want that container in my backyard. I don't want to see it in my neighbor's backyard. But I can just tell you, we're seeing more and more people who have interest in it. If we have regulations, if we want to do something, just keep in mind that we want to think about it in residential zones and commercial zones. Think about it as a principal structure, not just as accessory. Because again, if we're talking commercial or principal, brick, 100% brick, you can't do this if we're insisting on brick on everything. Do we want to allow it as an accessory structure?
I don't know if you
temporary
loosely
structures.
define brick as a square object that's not.
Yeah, it's a giant metal brick. But, so we need to be thinking about that. So what's your feeling? What's your temperature on this topic? Do we like the current regulation that if you bring one of these in your backyard, you've got to modify it so that it kind of doesn't look like a metal container? Is that a good policy of the city?
One thought that I have on this.
Yeah.
As I've kind of thought about this, obviously you can see, and I have seen some very unique uses and repurposing of them, and I think that obviously there's people that have put some money into making that happen in the way that they have. But the other thing that I thought about too, especially in the climate we're in right now and the cost of building materials, I would much rather have a person be able to go this route to use it as a storage space in their yard and to help screen some of that stuff from seeing it, from them being prohibited because of building material costs right now to try and build a structure to put something in. I think it provides that transitional space for them. Again, in a climate where, I went down and bought some electrical supplies the other day. A roll of 12-2 Romex right now is $122. $122 for a roll, for just
Is that 100 foot?
12-2
Wow.
Romex.
100 foot?
Piece of plywood's
100 foot?
$45.
No, 50,
That's 50, oh my gosh.
50 foot of 14-2 was $82.
I think the better question is the size on the properties more
Right.
so. I
But
think
like
that's
I say,
really,
And again, to keeping everything in context, you have to remember too, that the city uses these up at Butterfield
Yep.
Park. And they've used them very effectively for
Yeah.
storage of things. But they're there.
But the question is, should
We're
we?
there and they
But they're
work.
there.
It should we? Because if we're not really making it
It protects-
accessible for
protects what's
residents,
inside.
should we?
Right,
Well,
and
Right.
that's what I'm saying, is again, they have used them, they've served a purpose,
Yeah.
whether you like them or not. The fact is, they're there. There's one that's been repurposed and is sitting right out in the parking lot right now, temporary facility.
Yep.
But as a COVID testing, so there are a lot of things, and again, I think we have to look at how we do it, but I think in general, there are appropriate uses for these. We've heard, because it was brought up, the fire station has one over here because they needed additional storage space. So there's one sitting over there, and honestly, when it comes to even temporary or training structures, especially I'm gonna go back to the line of work I am, these things work awesome for training structures. But there are cities that make it so we can't build a very useful, inexpensive training structure because they don't allow these in there when, again, there's a means to it. So for me, again, I think we have to be very careful in how we approach it, but I do think that there is a space to look at allowing these in some uses.
I think what you need to consider more is what the guidelines would be for
Right.
allowing
Oh,
use.
absolutely, 100%.
And so,
And I think that's.
And I think
what
some
the question
spaces-
is, do we want to
yeah.
go down
Do we
that
want to go down that road?
Yeah.
I
Right.
say yes.
So
And I think we do.
I do.
I do too.
I think my vote is yes, we go down that road.
yeah.
I asked this to be on because I had a resident reach out. They're in trouble with code enforcement because they have a container in their backyard. You cannot barely see it. They have a 6-foot fence. You can only see the top
Yep.
portion of it from there, but because you can see it, then it violates code. And I was like, what? This is crazy. Well, to me, sorry, I was talking. I drive around the city and see them all over on our property, and to me, that is absolutely incorrect. If the city is able to utilize them, to me, it's not fair to say a resident in their own privacy of their backyard can't utilize one. I could see if they're stacking 15 on top of each other, yeah, maybe that would not be appropriate, but to put it in the backyard as a storage container for no different than going and buying a Tough Shed or whatever else other kind of brand is out
You
there.
probably have to fall under the guidelines of the distance from your neighboring
Yeah,
yards and
but
things like that.
But I think that I think it's a big overreach to say they have to have the same, they gotta be stuccoed and half brick. To me, that's, again, it's putting a very heavy cost burden on somebody that's just simply trying to utilize a storage unit.
And I believe that resident was even willing to paint it.
Yeah, to paint it. He said,
to
paint
match.
it
And
the
again,
paint it the color.
This picture you have up here, some of them can be pretty rough looking, absolutely, but if at least there's a requirement of color match or something like things, I think you can change it drastically really quick.
Well, I think you can, and it's kind of the use of what you're doing with the container
Yeah.
too, that we'd put into our guidelines and say, if you want to use it for storage, here's the guidelines. If you want to make it into a she shed or a man cave,
Yeah.
here's our guidelines. You know what I mean?
Also, if you go commercial with it, I
Make
think
it into a pool,
the one
the
thing that I
guidelines
like
might
about
be-
commercial is this is like the startup concept.
Yeah.
This is like cheap, inexpensive, give people a chance to try to see if they can make something work. And it's a little bit different, and you can actually build upon it. You're like, yeah, we have 20 of them full. We want another 20. Or something like that, and it's smaller, more boutique, and to be honest, it's really the direction of shopping in general.
They're not giving these away,
No.
this is $3,000 for a basic box,
That's heavy
but it is a
price still.
structure that's sound.
Yeah, but I mean, they
Right.
may be charging $200, $300 in rent, and that's it for a month, or $100 for rent. Who knows?
Well, like,
And so-
just the food, food trucks are super popular. I went to a container restaurant, right, in California, and there's like 8 restaurants in this, and they have this, like a central gathering place. It was perfect for my family. We could go to Waffle Love, they could go get something else, and it was awesome.
Yeah,
I
obviously
like
the guidelines would need to be
Yeah.
in place, but
So, I have a couple concerns, but they're more in regards to things like safety. Yes, obviously these shipping containers are extremely durable because we ship a massive percentage of world goods in these type of containers. So they obviously hold up. My concern is more around how do we adjust our building code to appropriately ensure the safety of the people that are in them, are using them. I mean, it's one thing for it to be a door you open, you throw your lawnmower in, you leave it, and you open it once a week, and that's all you do. It's another thing if there's water running to it and there's power running to it and somebody might be sleeping in it. And that, or if they're stacked, like those are the kind of things that, for me, give me pause. I think I disagree in some ways with Sherry in regards to screening them. I think that if you have an 8 or a 10-foot, object, that there's a reasonable expectation that I'm not going to block my the line of sight of my neighbor. I don't know what the right answer is there. I'm not saying that it is necessarily our job or our place to regulate that, but I think that it's definitely something we should be considering.
well, we do regulate it with our accessory building standards. And so we do tell the community they can only have it at this height. And so there is some regulation in it.
Well, and another thought that I had about accessory buildings design standards. So we know that we just had a threat, and we think it's going to come back.
Yeah.
The state is saying single-family homes, they're going to reduce our ability to regulate design, right? So if that goes away, but we're still regulating design for the accessory structure, that doesn't seem like that's going to work. So I think we're already needing to make some adjustments on what we allow in our accessory structure standards. And then Mayor, your comment, I mentioned that our own building official had received some training. I was happy to hear that she was receptive and confident, but I don't know the issues. So we'll make sure we include her in the drafting of any amendment.
It would still have to go through a permitting process.
Yes.
That loops them into the review and the inspections and all those things that go with it.
Because this looks amazing.
Yeah.
I would have no problem if my neighbor put that right back in the backyard and I could see that wouldn't bother me at all, as long as I couldn't see what they were doing inside, because I would be jealous of the big screen TV. But like that looks great. What I also but let's look at the other side. What happens when somebody gets a $500 version of this because that somebody pulled it out of somebody else's backyard that's been sitting there for 20 years.
Yeah.
It is rusted through in multiple places, and there becomes a point where it becomes a hazard, right? More than it is a use. And so, don't get me wrong. I'm in full agreement. I think we should try to find ways to allow this type of use, even if just in storage. Like even if it's just storage, I'm okay with saying let's find a way to make that work.
That's the easiest place to start, at least.
Yeah. Like even with just storage, like let's find the right answer for that. I think that we had some really good input here of, okay, well, we need to adjust what size they can use based on how big of a lot they have. If they're under, a quarter of an acre, it has to be under, 30 feet or 28 feet or whatever that size. I know they come in standard sizes. If it's over an acre, they can have whatever size they want, kind of thing. And those are the things that would make me more comfortable, or even just a percentage of the grass or of the yard or whatever.
I think our initial thought is we would just treat it as far as dimensionally the same as any other accessory structure. Now we'll see how well that actually works. We'll test that because obviously the containers, although there's a variety of sizes, We want to see how well they actually fit those parameters. My guess is that they probably will fit.
I mean,
But
in
we'll
all
look at
honesty,
it.
I'm looking at it going,
We'll look at
I bet you I could bury one of those halfway in the ground and be a great place for me, you know? So.
A shelter.
Or entirely in the ground, except there's granite. But yeah, I'm totally, I don't have any problem. And in all honesty, if it's behind a fence and it meets the basics of safety, like, I don't care. Like, if it's screened and it like, whatever. It's when it's not screened that I feel like there might need a little bit more thought put into the appearance, just to avoid, you know, some issues that could come from it. Because I think if somebody's painting it on a regular basis and maintaining it, it's going to last 30, 40, 50 years. But if they're not maintaining it, that's where I get concerned about the safety. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I would just ask if we could treat this the same way maybe that we just did the last deal, that we start looking at the smaller issue, because the
Yeah.
things you listed there, those are all bigger issues
Right.
as they go. But I guess the more critical thing to me was to take care of some imbalance, in my opinion. We have a resident who has a container in his backyard. He's in violation
Yeah.
right now, so let's see what we can do to bring that in harmony with what would be a reasonable use.
And that was my intent, Sherry. The only reason why I talked about the broader conversation is I just wanted you to be thinking about if we focus on regulations on this one thing, it may impact kind of what we do down the road in these other areas. We're not
Totally
ready
agree.
to do some of these more creative things right now, but
Totally agree.
we're kind of setting
We're
a direction.
setting
Yeah,
a
thank
direction,
you. Yeah.
because as soon as we signal the change,
Yeah.
then the other questions are gonna come.
Yeah,
Okay,
so-
now, what else can I do?
Yeah.
Yeah, just the path forward, I understand that, but I just thought if we can start looking at each aspect
Yep.
of it and say, okay, if you're a residential and you would like to use it as this, quite frankly, most of the yards in Harriman, you couldn't get a container back there because you couldn't deliver it. There's no pathway to their backyard.
Or they have no
So-
backyard.
Yeah, or they have no backyard. So it's not going to apply to a lot of people. The people that are going to be able to fit a container are going to have larger yards because you can get to their backyard. So I don't think it's going to be a huge issue, but I just think that it's a responsible way to store things. It's an economic way. It still is not cheap. And so they're a very economic way to store things. And if we want to say, okay, paint it or something like that to where it looks
I do
decent.
think with that, and when she said painted, I think there needs to probably be something written with it if these are allowed that just says if there is rust showing, it needs to be
Yeah.
painted and maintained or
Yeah, I'm
something.
going to
Yeah.
explore that because I've wondered
Something
the
to
same
that
thing.
nature.
So Sherry said something that I do want to touch on from a philosophical view and from like a policy view that I think I disagree with you slightly. It's the fact that I take pause if we're making the change to allow something for a specific resident.
It's not for a specific, they brought the issue forward.
But
and it made the
for me,
issue.
that's what it came. I'm trying not to put words in your mouth, but that's the way it came off to me. Was that there's a resident that wants this, so let's change the rules. And
I don't think.
No.
hold on, and that gives me pause. With that being
Gives me
said,
pause.
I don't necessarily disagree that we should go forward and make the changes. I just want, for me, it's important that I feel like it's important for me to state that I'm happy to make the change and look at it, but I'm not going to be looking at it in regards to a specific case or specific
Let me
resident.
assure you, Mayor, that we're receiving many requests
And that's
for
helpful.
this.
And that's very
Yeah.
helpful.
But I think that's what
Yeah.
promotes change is when we become aware of it, whether
Yeah.
it's 1 or 100 citizens. If we become aware of it and feel like it's something needed in our community, we have to consider it. And so I think we just need to think about it from that perspective and not be like, are we pointing out one individual? If it's something the
And I'm
community
totally-
needs to change, then we need to change it, so.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was a good conversation. That's really helpful.
Did anybody online have any we kind of forget about?
The people in the sky.
Jackson, Andrea, Joy, do any of you have any additional comments on this topic?
My only comment was kind of along the lines with what Brody was saying about food trucks or retail, is maybe this would be something we could consider for the area around City Hall. It's kind of more of a temporary structure, and maybe we could make that work for smaller retailers.
That's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yes. Tomorrow.
Woody, can we have that tomorrow? No.
Well, Starbucks does these all the time.
Yes,
There's
they do.
several different locations they have on a corner.
Jackson, did you have a comment?
I think Sherry hit the nail on the head when she said that as far as backyards, there aren't that many that are gonna fit these.
I agree.
But is this conversation more so of just like having something for storage? We're not talking about having these as an AGU right now, right?
Not yet.
Not right now, but I wanted to see if these ideas resonated with you. Let's say, we'll start with just a simple accessory structure.
Yeah.
Standard.
And the pool.
I think I have some similar concerns as the mayor. I just kind of wonder how some of our residents are going to perceive trailers in their backyard. I think that if you consider a house that sits up higher, and then you have a house that sits down lower, and you'll still be able to see the trailer. You're almost kind of blocking that sight right there. And for me personally, I struggle with this. If it looks beautiful like that, great, go for it. But I don't think that just having those storage containers would be good.
Just to clarify, we're talking about having a container on a foundation or on the ground, not on wheels, not a trailer per se.
So there's an area a trailer in my area, and it is right up against a fence horizontally, and I would be so upset if my neighbor did that. Right. But I'm in 8.25. So, I mean, I just think really size we really have to look at, and the setbacks with these.
Same as accessory dwelling units, and they can only take up a certain percentage of your backyard, and they can't be, I think we have already standards for that, correct?
We do have some.
And admittedly, Heather, I think we will hear concerns from the other side, just like what you just expressed. Not everybody's going to be in agreement on this, but I want to at least start with this group to see where we start, and I'm sure it'll change.
What might help us is some examples of when you come back with this to us, some examples of what it might, how it might fit in a example property, just so that we can so I could better visualize what we're looking at. That would probably make me more comfortable with, even if just like, what is it going to look like behind a 6-foot fence, and having some examples of that so I can understand, hey, if it's a 10-foot, if it's an 8-foot, if it's, whatever, how is that going to actually look? And is that something that is so obtrusive that it creates a problem? There's a difference between being something I don't like and being overly obtrusive. And I think I'd like to see examples of where we might be finding that line.
Thank you, everybody, for
These
commenting.
are actually shorter than most of the accessory dwellings
They are.
than they even are. So as far as site view and stuff, they're actually shorter than most.
I think my
even
shed's
a shed.
14 foot.
Yeah, exactly.
And we're talking about 8 feet.
So they're actually less than.
Most fences are 6, so you're talking about 2 feet above. Any other discussion on this? All right. 1.5, that item has been requested to be removed, and so we won't be talking about that. And then future meetings, 2.1, Planning Commission meeting is Thursday, May 6th, in 2021 at 7 p.m. And then this next City Council meeting is Wednesday, May 12th, 2021 at 7 p.m. I'll look for a motion
To adjourn.
Motion made. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you so much, guys.
That's pretty early. It's only 8.
That was the earliest.
I know you kind of like the
We've done in a long time. Yeah.
because you're going to say so many words.
Oh, yeah, no.
And I'll give you an example. I worked for the railroad, right?